Hey YouTube, Young Connoisseur here. Today I'm going to go over the top 10 things that I use to evaluate a used car. I get asked this a lot. People say, Eric, what are the things you look for? You buy so many cars. What are the telltale signs that you could be getting a lemon or something that you're biting off more than you can chew, so to speak, for buying a used luxury or sports car? And this will apply to any other car, whether you're buying a Toyota Camry for $3,000, a Jetta, or you're buying, a new, or not a new, but a slightly used Lamborghini, McLaren, Porsche, Maserati, whatever. So these are in no particular order. We're going to run through them. Pay attention, because some of these things you might not have thought about. Some of them you probably have, but these are guaranteed ways to save you a headache down the road. So first of all, I like to walk right up to the car, look at the tires. Are all the tires a good name brand, or are they some Chinese, Walmart shop and save, or not shop and save, but Sam's Club deal, like an $80 tire, like a Shenzhen whatever, or are they all Michelin's, Pirelli's, something decent. Tires are the most important thing that connect your car to the road, so you should have something at least decent on there. In modern day tires, unless you're talking a track tire, honestly they last at least 10 to 20,000 miles, regardless of what kind of car you're running. So why would you save $200-300 on a $1,200 set of tires to put some cheap piece of crap on there? That, and I make sure that they match. You don't want to have different things on the front or on the rear. Next up, while you're down there looking at the tires, take a look at the brakes. Are the rotors warped or they cracked? If you're looking at something with carbon ceramic rotors, I do a lot of track events. I have a lot of clients with carbon ceramic brakes. I've had a couple carbon ceramic rotors on cars myself. Seeing little spider hair cracks coming out of the drilled parts of the rotor is usually a sign that they've been heated up before. We've done stuff, actually got a chance to drive the new 911 Turbo S a couple weeks ago, the brand new one. And one of the cars came in, we were at an event, and saw the car right before it went out. The rotors were brand new. The cars had literally like 8 miles on them. And one set would come back, there wouldn't be any kind of, little spider web cracks. The other set come back, boom, different driver running the car hard, tons of little hairline fractures everywhere. But that's not a problem to be alarmed with. But as for the normal cars, make sure they're not the cheap Chinese, like cast eBay rotors. You'll know when you're looking at them if they look like they're like aluminum or something ridiculous. If you go on eBay, you can find $100 shipped for all 4 rotors and brake pads for pretty much whatever car, and they're the cheapest, worst things ever. I've seen them at used car dealerships on the lower end stuff, like the 10 grand and under cars, because it's a cheap thing to replace rather than spend 800, 900, 2, 3, 4 grand on brakes. So I always take a look at the rotors. Make sure that they fit the aesthetic and the philosophy of use of the car. If I'm looking at a whatever and it's completely stock and it's got a full set of race brakes on it, that makes me raise my eyebrows. Also, while you're down there, you can shine a little light. In almost every single scenario, you can take a look at how much brake pad life is left. So you'll be able to see if it's got 3-4 millimeters, or if it's more like 8, 9, 10 millimeters or more in thickness. That's usually a good sign. Next up, like I said, these are in no particular order. I check out the panel gaps, especially on the front, right around where you're looking down the front of the car, where the hood meets the quarter panels, meets the front bumper, if the gaps are the same left or right. This doesn't always apply to American cars. I'm picking on you guys, Ford, Chevy, all these guys, because they're not built with the best panel gaps and tolerances left or right. But a BMW, anything European, they're always perfect, they're always exact. The headlights don't have any gaps between where the hood closes down on top. Everything is just nice and tight. Generally that would be a sign that it was in a collision, fender bender, or the fender came off for some reason and was fitted improperly, putting it back on. While I'm there, I also take a look for clear bra. If there's clear bra on the hood but no clear bra on the front bumper, that's a huge red flag that the bumper was taken off, repainted, and they didn't clear bra it again, and then they left the clear bra on the hood because the hood wasn't damaged. So if I'm looking at an exotic like a Bentley and I see clear bra on the hood, clear bra on the mirrors, clear bra on the rocker panels behind the doors and behind the tires, but I don't see it on the front bumper, huge red flag. It's going to be enough that if it's something I can't hit with a paint meter, that I'm really going to take a close look at the rest of the car, and if everything isn't perfect with it, then I'm probably going to pass or try to get it a heck of a lot cheaper. I also look for non-original parts on a car that should otherwise be completely original. Say for instance, we're looking at like a stock 2009 750i BMW. The car is 100% stock wheels, stock suspension, ride height, you know, you name it. But it has aftermarket taillights, or they're completely blacked out, or there's, you know, something else going on with the car, like it has an exhaust, like an AC Schnitzer exhaust, but the car is otherwise stock appearing. Chances are whoever had that previously had it heavily modified and tried to revert it as close back to stock, and they just left the parts that were a hassle to or labor intensive to remove. So that car was probably not stock its whole life if it has any non-stock parts on it. As far as driving the car and starting it up with the motor actually running, what I like to do is, if I'm going to see something with a private seller, I just tell the guy when I'm coming, leave the car in your garage, don't fire it up or anything. I want to see how it runs with a cold motor and everything else. So what I'll do is I'll get in the car, turn the power on, put the AC on max, pop the hood, and then I'll start the car, and I'll immediately run back to the tailpipes and see, is it blowing smoke or is it just blowing condensation and moisture from, you know, sitting, not being driven. Also, I'll run back around to the front and I'll listen for, you know, valve noise, you know, slap in the engine, any kind of rod knock, anything that would be an otherwise bad sign. Or you can hear low oil pressure, no oil pressure, generally depending on how highly strung the engine is. While I'm up at the front of the car, I also take a good look, shut it off after I let it warm up a little bit, as I pull the dipstick. You know, I'm not really checking the level of the oil, whether it's low or high. I'm not going to say it's irrelevant, but it's not something I'm generally super concerned about. Cars almost always have enough oil, especially if it's a dry sump. If there's oil in the dry sump, the engine's getting oil unless it's crazy low. But what I do is I look at the dipstick right on the top, on the plastic plunger where there's the O-ring seal into the dipstick outlet. Is there any kind of rust? Also, if it's got a braided steel or a coiled steel dipstick rod, is there any kind of rust or condensation on that rod itself? Because if the car was driven short distances continuously, the oil wasn't being warmed up enough to burn off any of the blow-by, the vapor, or the water that would get into the oil. That would mean that most of the miles on the car are probably done in tight traffic or in the city. So that's something, like if you see a car that sounds like, wow, that's really low miles for the year or the options or whatever else, but you're in somewhere like New York City, Miami, LA, it might have spent, you know, say if it's got 15,000 miles, like on a Porsche Boxster from 2011, those all could be gridlock miles, which would be the equivalent of, you know, maybe 100,000 miles on the car. So that's something, it's an indicator, something you want to take note of and definitely check. While I'm up at the front of the car, I also look for clips and bolts, the little plastic pop rivets, all the things that are cheap and easy to replace. They generally do not come out. I've seen so many cars that are just beat to death, they still have all the plugs underneath. Then you'll get something that's a supposedly well-kept, you know, well-cared for car that was run gently its whole life, and then I'll be missing, you know, 6-7 bolts, 3 in a row that are holding like an under tray or an aero plate to like the front bumper or the wheel well linings, and they're missing. That raises an eyebrow for sure of whether it was in a collision or for whatever reason it was disassembled and then assembled improperly or without the care that it deserved. I also check the alignment. That's a big thing. You know, most people, anybody will notice. Your grandma, somebody who's a first-time driver, if the car's pulling down the highway, if it's steering, you know, a little to the left or a little to the right, that's a major sign for me. All the cars I look at are generally sought after cars, whether they're inexpensive. There's nice cars that can be had for $5,000 to $10,000. Most people that drive a car worth owning, in my opinion, and that price or higher, will not live with something that's out of alignment. Even if it's just a little bit, it's something it's in the back of your head, it's an annoyance, and you have to deal with it every second that the car's in motion. That's always going to be drifting that direction. So people always fix it. It's generally $100 to $500 depending, so it should always be aligned. If it's not aligned, like I said, it's a major red flag because it's so easy and cheap to fix that it was in a collision in one of the control arms, A-arms. Something is bent somewhere and it's just not working out right. So that's something I will not buy a car, honestly, under any condition. I don't care what kind of deal it is, unless I'm buying something to turn into a track car that is out of alignment. There's plenty of cars out there, unless you're buying an Enzo or Veyron or something, and there's a couple in the country, I'll pass. Now onto the driving portion of it. Pretty simple. As far as gearbox, definitely make sure you run it through every single gear, neutral and reverse. So check all that. If it's a manual transmission or an automated manual like an SMG, Ferrari's old F1, Aston Martin's, AMS, any kind of single clutch gearbox, make sure that clutch locks up really tight. You can test this by getting on the highway or getting 50 miles an hour or so and putting it in its torque peak. So generally on most cars it's probably around $3,000 unless it's some twin turbo V8 whatever. So put it in like fourth, put it in fifth gear, keep the RPMs pretty low, and just stand on the throttle. Give it full power and just keep your eye on that tachometer needle so that you're going to be loading the engine the most in a higher gear right around the torque peak than you would in first gear running it to red line to see if the clutch slips. So put it in its all gear, give it full throttle, and make sure that the revs climb in a linear fashion relative to the speed of the car. Another thing I'll do, if it's an actual manual with your hand, is what I'll do is I'll make a sloppy shift or two in second, third, or fourth gear, still on the throttle when I let the clutch out. But I want to let it out fast. I want to make sure that the clutch plates actually grab and they engage and lock up really tight. And another thing with a manual, the foot pedal manual cars, I like to check where the clutch engagement is. So with your foot all the way to the floor, the clutch should engage pretty close to the floor. If it's something that's very at the top of the stroke, so when you press the clutch and you're releasing, trying to go, and there's nothing, and then it starts to grab, and then right where it starts to grab, it's basically done, and the clutch is all the way at full extension, chances are that clutch, either A, it's hydraulic and it needs bled, or B, it's on its way out and the clutch plates have worn significantly, so the clutch is now all the way at the end of its stroke, and that's a real hassle to replace a clutch in anything. And parts are relatively cheap even on exotics. You're talking $2-3 grand for the parts on a clutch, sometimes $4 grand, but the labor is what's definitely going to kill you. Even on an inexpensive car like a E46 M3, you can get a clutch for $600-700 bucks, but the labor, you're looking at a chunk of change. So that's something that I generally try to avoid. Then the rest of it comes down to personal preference. Depending on what you're looking at, if the car looks worn and like it's had a hard life, like if the seat bolsters are completely ruined, the rubber coating that they put on like the window switches and on the control buttons on the steering wheel, the center console, the radio buttons are all smeared and worn off or sticky. If the car looks like it's had a hard life, make no mistake about it, it absolutely has. On the contrary, if cars look like they've been very well kept, I've seen some people work some real magic with full detailing and shampooing and reconditioning leather. That's not always a guarantee that the car's been well cared for, but if it looks like it's had an easy life, chances are it has. So wrapping that video up, hopefully you learned a couple of things. Hopefully next time you go and check out a used car, you're gonna pay attention and maybe notice a couple of things you wouldn't have noticed before, and hopefully save yourself some money. So get out there, explore some used cars, and get something you enjoy. Please subscribe to the channel, and we're going to do a bunch more videos like this. Thanks, guys.